Well, about a year ago, my wife, Kristen, was working at the Cameron Park Zoo. And if you have any chance to get someone you know work at the Cameron Park Zoo, I highly recommend it. Try to befriend some of those zoo workers. One, they work very hard. But two, you can get some of these free backstage passes, these VIP tours to go experience the zoo in ways you didn't think was allowed. And so we got to go behind the scenes, and we got to feed animals like the giraffes. I think we have a video that might show some of us doing that, as well as feeding porcupines and orangutans. It was fantastic. And I'm not going to show all of the family videos because that's a different setting for that. Besides the giraffes and beautiful things like that were the tigers and the rhinos. So to go see the tigers, we were introduced to this, we'll call it a shack. It's a shed. It was this small, really small building, and we were told, yeah, the lions are in there. Let's go. And you're like, I don't know if there's enough room for everyone in there with us as well. And so you open this door, and to the right is the three cages, and to the left is just a hallway to access the cages. And you're told, stay at the far left wall. Put your backs on the wall so that if you, by chance, were a little bit closer, the tigers wouldn't be able to scratch through the cages and, cut open your flesh. Minor things like that. So you're walking in here with some trepidation, with a little bit of fear. And you're walking down the hallway, and you just kind of like do this down the hallway, and then you feed the tigers, which feeding tigers giant meat, we don't get anywhere close. We put it in a thing, and then it shoves under. Was just, that's so scary. It's so like it's eating flesh, right? It's eating meat right there, and you're right there, and whether you're scared of cats or dogs, you will be scared of a tiger if you are around a giant living tiger. Because just like when it pranced into the room, it pounced into the room as if it was a cat. You see like the power it had just to pounce into this room. And then even with not even just eating, before we gave it the food, just to hear it breathe and get excited about eating, and all you hear is just like this. And you're like, I don't think we're supposed to be here. Like, why are y'all letting this happen? But you're behind a cage, so you have a little bit of sense of security. Then we get to go to feed the rhinos, and the rhinos, much different experience, much more safe at first. And so there's these two bars that barricade you from the rhinos, and it's this otherwise wide open. So I could walk into the feed the rhinos or whatever, and we did. We got to feed the rhinos, we got to pet them, and you're like, this is wild. Are we sure we're allowed to do this? And you're just feeding them, whatever. And then it was safe until the other rhino was a little jealous that this rhino was getting all the food. So he came and he nudged that rhino, and the other rhino fell into the fence, which, not a big deal. We were safe unless you're 2,000 pounds, and 2,000 pounds falling anywhere into the fence is a little bit dangerous. So if my hands or my kids' hands were in there at that moment, they would not be there anymore. Like it was like, oh my goodness. And it was this reminder that these are wild, wild animals. Like it would be dumb for anyone to domesticate these animals. And my sermon title here today is Domesticating Jesus. And I worry we as Christians are trying to domesticate Jesus into something a little more peaceful, a little more tameable. And we are robbing Jesus of his power and majesty. And so we're going to be talking about Jesus in these few ways. I'm going to give you three pictures of Jesus: the pet, the picture, and the priest. The pet, the picture, and the priest. And today is week 2 of the book of Revelation. If you missed last week and you are planning on staying here for a while, which I hope you do, please go back and listen to last week's sermon. I think it is kind of like the decoder ring to understand the rest of the book of Revelation. It's the intro and understanding, make sure we're using the same terms. So please go back and look at that. But today, we're going to look at these 3 images of Jesus: the pet, the picture, and the priest. Today, right now, the pet. What is the difference between a kitty cat and a tiger? You would think a lot, unless you were Joe Exotic, who treats them like the same thing, right? Right? This is one of the favorite things that we found out during the pandemic was the introduce to Joe Exotic and all of his craziness. But if you're not him, if you're anyone else, you realize that the difference between a tiger and a cat is very drastic. The difference between a dog and a wolf is very, very drastic. And if you were to say, I want to bring a wolf into my house, you have to do a lot to get them to be ready. Probably couldn't actually happen, and probably doesn't happen well for the people on Tiger King, and you realize all the danger that poses. Because when we want a pet, what we want is something a little more docile, a little more peaceful, something that you don't want to have to pay a ton of attention to. In fact, you're a little mad when they get a little messy, and you don't want it to be such a big of a distraction. But the reason we want these pets is not just to ignore them. We want them to respond to us when we call them. That we are in charge of them. We want them to do tricks. When we say sit, and they sit, we feel amazing. We're like, yes, they've learned the trick. They do what we say. But the reason we said yes to a pet in our family was because we just thought this would bring some life and joy into our family. And so we have this dog named Tonks. You guys seen Tonks before? Tonks is an English bulldog, and Tonks is just a bottle of joy, as you might want from a pet. When I come home, and I may have been gone for 10 minutes, Tonks is like, oh, where have you been? I'm so excited to see you. And she doesn't have a tail, so she doesn't shake her tail when she's excited to see me. She shakes her whole butt. And so her whole body just wiggles up, and she's like, where? Oh, I love you. I love you. And when you are having a bad day, and you come home, and you have a dog that's just like, you're the best, there's something really good about that. It's so comforting. You're like, okay, the world out there is crazy, but this dog loves me, and I'm okay. That's one of the reasons we have these pets, is that they bring us this comfort in this way. They lift our spirits, but they're still pets. And I suggest that Christians have downgraded Jesus to the status of pet, that he's comforting, he lifts our spirits, but he belongs to us, which works until it doesn't. Until life gets really hard and you don't need a pet to be in charge of the world. You need King Jesus to be in charge of the world. And so John, in verse 9, says, I, John, he introduces himself, your brother and companion in the suffering and the kingdom and the patient endurance that are ours in Jesus, was on the island of Patmos because of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus. Now, Patmos was this island that was about 40 miles southwest of Ephesus, the first city he writes his letter to. And Patmos was like Alcatraz. It was this island that was solely dedicated by the Roman Empire to bring the criminals to. So you could not get away, right? And now John is at the island of Alcatraz, right? You're like, oh, this must be like a bloodthirsty villain. John is an old man. John is at least 90 years old. And he's being put on the island of Alcatraz, of Patmos. And there's something wild about this, that when you're on this island for professing your faith, you're 90 years old, you've outlived all of your friends, all of his friends were imprisoned, stoned, or decapitated, killed in some other way. Like he is the last of the apostles standing. How would you feel in that moment? Going, is this really worth it? Everyone else around me is dead. Do I really have to go through this too? Can't I just end my life happy? And so we get to see what John's doing. Verse 10, on the Lord's day, I was in the Spirit. The Lord's day is another for Sunday, for Resurrection Sunday. So he is now, on the Lord's day, he is worshiping at 90 years old. When conditions aren't perfect, when he doesn't have comfortable pews to sit in, when he doesn't have an amazing band to lead him in worship, he is all alone worshiping the Lord, but he knows he's not alone. Oh, I just want to say to our older saints in our midst, you are an encouragement to us. You are encouragement to a younger generation that shows us that it's not about how you start, but it's also about how you finish. And so you are a light and hope to a younger generation that says it can be done. Because many of us are wondering, does anyone finish well? It seems like everyone renounces their faith. But some of us in our midst here, thank you. Lead well. Continue leading this way. You make us. You bring us hope. That there is hope for all of us. So please hear that. But how do you keep the faith when Jesus is just your pet? When Jesus is just something that brings you happiness, and you might say, "Hey, okay, that seems a little extreme. I never refer to Jesus as a pet." Fair. I don't think anyone here wants to go as far as saying that. However, I do believe every single one of us finds ways to domesticate Jesus. Have y'all seen this video? Let's see if this works here for us.
Jesus is a friend of mine. Jesus is my friend. Jesus is a friend of mine. I have a friend in Jesus. Jesus is a friend of mine. Jesus is my friend. Jesus is a friend of mine. He taught me how to live my life as it should be. He taught me how to turn my cheek when people laugh at me. I've had friends before, and I can tell you that he's one who will never leave you flat. Jesus is a friend of mine. Jesus is my friend. Jesus is a friend of mine. I have a friend in Jesus. Jesus is a friend of mine. Jesus is my friend. Jesus is a friend of mine.
Why? Why, Christians? Why? This is an older video, as you can see, but why are we doing this? This is so cheesy. Is Jesus our friend? Absolutely. We're not saying that Jesus is not our friend. John 15:13, Jesus says, "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down his life for one's friends." And so we're not saying that Jesus is not our friend. What I'm worried about is that's all we are saying Jesus is. That Jesus is just our friend, that he's our buddy, that he's our pal, that he's this cozy figure that makes us feel good inside, is someone to say, everything's going to be okay. Which is, I want to hear. And when things aren't going okay, it is really nice when a friend says everything's going to be okay. If we're at war and one of you says, "Slim, it's going to be okay. Thank you." And yet those words can feel a little hollow because you don't really know if it's going to be okay. But if it was from a military general who's saying, "No, I know how this is going to go. We're going to be okay." That changes things from a nice friend to say things are going to be okay, and you're like, "Thanks, that was encouraging." But now it's some substance from someone who knows. And I would say we, at this time, when we are worried about our futures, we're worried about the future of our country, we're worried about what our kids are going to grow up in, we're worried about our jobs, we're worried about people that we love, and we're worried, like, what is going to happen? We need to hear from someone who actually knows, can say that it's going to be okay. That's what I need right now. Not a pet. I need a military general, someone who can actually garner strength in this time, not domesticated, but looking to that leader in that way. And so if he's not the pet, let's look at the picture that we're given of Jesus. The picture that John gives us of Jesus, brace yourselves, is actually kind of frightening. If you need to step out, if your heart isn't able to take scary conditions like that, I understand. Maybe you can take a break here. But this is the intensity that comes in the book of Revelation. We're about to see this untamed, undomesticated Jesus. In verse 10, I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet. I don't know if you know what a trumpet-like voice sounds like, but we know what a trumpet sounds like. But a trumpet voice is not something that we are coming up with a lot. It has nothing to do with Jasmine. I'm sure her voice is beautiful. But to combine those two things makes you go, what is happening? Now, in the Old Testament, whenever a trumpet was sounded, it was to announce God's people, to gather God's people to say something important is about to happen. And so you're alerted to what is about to happen here. And so you hear a trumpet, you're gathered to it, and then in verse 11, oh, not verse 11, where are we at? Yes, verse 11. It says, write on the scroll what you see and send it to the 7 churches, to Ephesus, Smyrna, Thyatira, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. Now he says, let me gather you here together. Let me announce this great news, and it's going to be to the 7 churches. Now, it's 7, not 4, not 9, 7. Now, these are real churches. You can see this map of the area of these 7 churches. They're all on a kind of a typical trading route there. So they're real. It's a real place. And yet, it's 7. And we are in this, what we learned about last week, apocalyptic literature. And that number 7 has meaning. It has power. And so it's not just to these 7 churches. They're the 7 churches that are embodying all churches of all time, the Holy Catholic or Universal Church in this way. And so John is writing to all the churches here. And so John hears a trumpet, and then verse 12, and I turned around to see the voice that was speaking to me. And when I turned, I saw 7 golden lampstands. Now, imagine how jarring this would have been. You're hearing a trumpet voice, whatever that sounds like, the screeching noise, the loudness of it, and you're looking to see the speaker, and then you see these 7 towering golden lampstands and going, what's happening? Where am I? Now, I've never been in a trance like John here and had a revelation like this, but I have had something, maybe a fraction of the jarring nature of hearing one thing and being surprised at what you saw. When I was doing youth ministry back in the day, I was leading a youth retreat, taking some of our kids on a trip, and back in the day, I was in charge of every detail on the youth retreat. If you've ever done youth ministry, it can be a very exhausting time. You are in charge of, all right, do we have enough food? Do we know where we're going later? Have I prepared the devotionals? Do I know what I'm speaking about? So I'm thinking about all of these things at this youth retreat while playing djembe and leading worship for our church at this moment. So set the scene. We're at this hotel conference room, and I'm in the corner. There's nothing but walls behind me, and I'm sitting down playing on my djembe, and I'm thinking about all of these stressful things like, oh gosh, did I order dinner? Oh, did I talk to the leaders about this? Oh, does that kid even know Jesus? And what am I preaching about? Like, I'm just stressing about all of this while trying to play djembe, trying to keep on beat. And I'm just feeling a panic attack at this moment. And in that moment, this is only time this has ever happened to me. I felt this hand on my shoulder. And I'm going, like this, going, what? Because I'm so scared. Because I know there's nothing behind me, but I'm looking, not knowing what I'm about to see, and I don't see anything. And so then I turn around and I'm just freaked out. I'm like, oh gosh, and I probably got off beat, and I'm just like, what is happening? And the juxtaposition of that fear that I just felt was now replaced with this inner voice that said, it's gonna be okay, Slime. I'm in control. I got this. And so I just started crying while playing. I probably look like a mess to these youth. Like, I don't know what's happening. I'm so scared, but now I'm so comforted. All in the same span moment. I think something similar is happening to John here. He's turning. He's hearing this trumpet voice. He's not sure what he's going to expect, and then he sees something completely different. This happens all throughout the book of Revelation. You never know what you're going to get. It's going to be very, very jarring every single time. And so when he finally looks, what is God saying? What happens here? In verse 13, he looks and he sees the lampstand, but now he sees, and among the lampstands was one like the Son of Man. And so he's probably frightened at first, but now he sees the Son of Man, which is Daniel's imagery for the King, the Messiah. Walking amongst these lampstands was Jesus. But Jesus, like John had never seen before, because the first time John had seen Jesus, he was a teenager. We have teenagers in here? Yeah, John was following Jesus at your age and saying, I'm going to follow you wherever. And John's the one in the gospel who says he's the Word made flesh. And so Jesus is the Word made flesh still, but now he's the Word made flesh glorified. He's very different to John. He's been revealed of his effulgent splendor of who Jesus actually is. And so now John is seeing the majestic, glorious Jesus. And then he says in verse 13, dressed in a robe, reaching down to his feet with a golden sash around his chest. The hair on his head was white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were like blazing fire. Oh, please do not domesticate this Jesus. See how wild and untamed this Jesus is. The white like wool is from Daniel 7, kind of reminding us of the absolute purity of Jesus. He has white hair, not because it's the actual color of his hair, but it's the wisdom that Jesus has. His eyes are burning with fire, which is a picture from Daniel 10. And what that means is that Jesus has these eyes that penetrate and can look right into your soul. If you've ever been in trouble with your mother, you know a fraction of this look. They can just look right into you, and you're like, you see everything. I'll confess it all, right? Jesus is saying, I see right into all of it. And then verse 15, his feet were like bronze glowing in a furnace, and his voice was like a sound of rushing waters. Oh, you think of how loud the ocean is? His voice was like the sound of rushing waters. Whew, this is not a buddy. This is the Alpha, and this is the Omega. In his right hand, he is holding stars. And what we know stars to be, these huge things. That Jesus is holding 7 stars in his hand. And out of his mouth comes a double-edged sword. The sword is coming from his mouth, not his hand. So we're seeing that his weapon is his words. And his words are double-edged, that they can bring judgment, but they can also bring healing. Do we see all that that's happening here? Then it says his face was like the sun shining in all its brilliance. Whew. What we're seeing here is that this is the eclipse Jesus. A few months ago, we saw the eclipse, and you had to go get your goggles to be able to see the eclipse. You need to put goggles on to see the eclipse Jesus in all of his glory. And why? Why does John reveal Jesus to us in this way? What's the point? Just to see that God is unapproachable? No. Remember, this book is written, Revelation is written during the time of this guy named Emperor Domitian. Do we have a picture of Domitian up here? There's Domitian. It's hard to see maybe from where you're at. He's got a messed up nose. I'm assuming that's just the statue. Kind of a funny looking dude. But he wasn't a funny guy. When Domitian came to power, he systematically targeted Christians to kill them if they did not bow the knee to say that Caesar is Lord. You could say Jesus is Lord, but you had to say Caesar is Lord too. And if you did not, he was out there going after all of these Christians. And he's the picture of someone that says raw power is going to win. And this is why John is now in Alcatraz, because he would not let his allegiance be taken so easily. Now, after this historic election this past week, I know there are some that are feeling liberated, like this is a hopeful moment. But there are also many who are worried. There are many in our midst who are worried about what this future means for us, what this means for our loved ones who might be deported, what this means for whole swaths of the government that might be gutted. There is a lot of uncertainty about the future here, and it's right for us to take this time seriously, because who will it hurt the most vulnerable? And so I think it's right for us to be a little concerned. There's a difference between being concerned and being paralyzed with fear, though. And if you are feeling that paralyzing fear, I want to encourage you to, at these moments, let's borrow courage from saints who've gone before us. Because you may not be feeling so courageous right now, but you can look at some of the saints who've gone before us and say, I want some of that. Because Domitian didn't just imprison people on the island of Patmos. Domitian was in charge, was saying, let's get creative in how we kill Christians. What they would do, they would take one Christian and say, bow down the knee to Caesar. And if you will not, we're going to tie both your hands to this horse, and we're going to tie your feet to this horse, and we're going to whip both horses and watch your limbs just be torn right off. We're going to impale you on a stake. And while you're lying on that stake alive, we're going to douse you and we're going to set you aflame. We're going to feed you to those lions and to those tigers. And we're going to get creative. We're going to drill a hole into your skull and we're going to pour molten hot lead into your skull to kill you in this way. I don't say all this to shock us, but to remind us that we are not alone, that there are Christians who have not bowed the knee to Caesar in the face of serious persecution. And if they can go through that, if this book was written in a time for those Christians, Revelation was written for those Christians, that's what they were reading. That's what helped them face the death in this way. And if this encouraged them, it can encourage us too. It can be our anchor in these times when everything feels out of control. And so let me encourage you to not despair in this way, but to take Jesus at face value in this. See what he actually reveals himself to be. And when the Christians did that, what happened? Tertullian's famous quote that the blood of martyrs is the seed of the church. When Romans watched Christians face death with peace and joy, it was too beautiful to snuff out. They were converting Roman soldiers through their persecution. And so whatever's in this book should be an encouragement to us. When John sees this Mosaic Jesus, and this is the mosaic of all these different Old Testament images of Jesus coming together, what does he do? He tells us in verse 17, when I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead, which I think is the only proper response to seeing the majestic Jesus. It's just to fall at your feet and go, oh, I am not worthy. That's what Moses came to with the burning bush. Like, I cannot be in your presence, God. It's too glorious. I've got to put the goggles on to the eclipse. God is too glorious in this way, this majestic king. And this is the ultimate point of the book of Revelation. Everyone is a little bit scared of the book of Revelation, thinking it's a book about the Antichrist. It's not about the Antichrist. It's about the living Christ. Christ is the ultimate point of the book of Revelation. We said it last week, we'll say it again this week. This book is going to lift your view of Jesus and see him as high and as mighty as he actually is. And once we put all these mosaic pieces of Jesus together, what is the ultimate image it gives us? Is that of a priest. And that's our last point here. That when you see this priest, it's going to change you. Because God is not just all powerful. God is actually all good. All of these images that we just read through are actually images of a priest doing priestly duties in the Holy of Holies. This is all temple imagery. The person wearing the long robe, Jesus wearing the long robe, is the high priest in the Holy of Holies. And what happens when you go to the Holy of Holies? Who do you meet there? You meet the glory of God that comes on into the Holy of Holies like this cloud. This is the presence of God filling the temple. The priest was wearing a sash as a garb. That's what the priest wore. You heard about the 7 lampstands. That is the menorah that is inside the Holy of Holies, that is lighting the room in there. And the role of the priest was to tend to the lampstands, to trim the lamps, to remove the wick, to add the oil. And likewise, Christ's role is to tend to the lampstands. That is Christ's role as the high priest, is to tend to the lampstands. And what are the lampstands? We hear in verse 20, the 7 lampstands are the 7 churches. So if you put this all together, what does that mean? Where does Jesus walk? Where is Jesus at in this world? He tells us here that he's amidst the 7 lampstands, which are the 7 churches, which means Jesus is in Mosaic right here today. We got to think about how wild that is. How scary it would be to be in the presence of the Holy of Holies, to be in that. That's wild. That's coming in front of a tiger cage unlatched and feeling the trepidation and the fear of being in the presence of God in that way. Do we feel that as we come into worship every single Sunday? That is the presence of the Lord being in our midst, that he's here tending to the churches. Some good, some bad. We'll learn about some of those in these upcoming weeks. But God is in our midst, tending to the churches. And what he's telling us in this time is that when you come to Jesus, and yes, we should quiver. Yes, we should, as we're approaching this wild animal, this Mosaic Jesus, we are realizing that we are standing in front of something that has more glory than we are. Something that has more glory than what you and I have. The word glory in the Old Testament could be translated weight. If something had more glory, it was weightier. It had more matter. So if you were to pick up a rock and to throw into a stream, the water would swirl around the rock. Why? Because it had more weight. It had more glory. It had more matter. In a sense, it mattered more. What Jesus is trying to tell us is that the glory of the Lord is now in the church, and it's like throwing a rock into the stream and saying, The whole world doesn't revolve around you. No, the whole world is going to revolve around Jesus. We're going to bend everything around Jesus and Jesus' will, because it has that much weight. It has that much glory. That's what we do every single week here at Mosaic. We come and we worship the Lord because it reorients us to God's glory. It wakes us up to the truth of the world, that there's something more firm, more solid, has more matter, and matters more in this world than all that's going on around us. Do we believe that? God is at work, and we have to see him and God in his glory, that the stone is in the middle of the stream, and I'm going to let everything else go by. Let's put the stone in the middle of the stream. And when we do, God is going to speak to us. He says in verse 17, then he placed his right hand on me and said, do not be afraid. Oh, I want to hear that. Do not be afraid. I am the first and the last. I am the living one. I was dead, and now look, I'm alive forever and ever, and I hold the keys of death and Hades. Don't you need to hear that today, that you do not need to be afraid? Why? Not just because some random person is saying it. No, because Jesus is saying it. Don't you dare disobey Jesus, because everything is going to swirl around him. Why? Because he says, I've got the keys of death and Hades. It's as if Jesus came and robbed some kidnappers and took their prisoners and took the keys away and locked them in. And they're now yelling, he beat us up. He's got the keys. He's got the people, and he's running away. Alert the others. This is what Jesus says. I've got the keys of death and Hades. Do you believe that? That death does not have any more power on us. That the flat line, when you see that scary line in a hospital, the flat line is not the end of the line. We will come back from the dead. And so there is nothing the world can do. There is nothing the world can throw at us. There's something far weightier than what this world has to offer. There's something far weightier than what the empire has to offer. We have our rock of salvation, and all creation bends around it. And so in a time when everyone is worshiping the empire, when that seems to be the only thing that we can talk about, that's the only thing on your Twitter feeds or whatever, worship the Lamb. Worshiping the Lamb is an act of resistance. And so your 3 so whats this week. First, reevaluate your view of Jesus. Have we domesticated Jesus? Have you domesticated Jesus? Have you robbed him of his power and his majesty? Reread Revelation 1 and refresh your view of Jesus. Second, do not be afraid. Because if I believe the first one, that Jesus is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, I'm going to take him at his word. Don't take my word for it, because who am I? Take Jesus' word. Do not be afraid. And then 3, reclaim the 167. There are 168 hours in the week. We spend 1 hour or so here on Sunday mornings worshiping. That's 167 more hours during the week that we need to be reminded that there is a true king, that all creation swirls around him, and that every knee will bow and every tongue confess that he is Lord of Lords. And so let's worship Christ. Let's throw a rock in the middle of the stream and say, everything bend around that. My heart will not tremble. My heart will not give away. Nothing shall move me, because Jesus matters more. Let me pray for us.